let's get back to our big story. Yes, of course, the deal is done. After 20 years of kicking the PIB around, the executive, the legislature, the oil firms, the whole communities and others, well, the PIB was today bidding the final bon voyage by the Senate. Now is on his way to the table of President Muhammadu Buhari, who will make history if he appends his signature to the document that is expected to grow local content, increase investments into the oil and gas sector, take better care of the host oil communities, among other such benefits. Let's take a quick listen to Senator Ahmed Lawan, President of the Senate, speaking earlier today at the plenary on the PIB. Listen.
A bill for an act to provide legal governance, regulatory and fiscal framework for the Nigerian petroleum industry, the development of host communities, and for related matters 2021 third reading taken, and the bill is passed. We promise Nigerians that we will do our best to pass the petroleum industry bill that have then so far at that time defied passage or defied assent. At least the demons have been defeated in this chamber. I want to assure the petroleum industry in Nigeria that what we have passed is a very good balance of giving them the kind of clement environment for them to not only stay here, but even bring more foreign investors into the oil and gas industry in Nigeria.
Ahmed Lawan, President of the Senate, sounding very positive there about the PIB. But just before the flurry of congratulations and well-wishing message starts pouring in, the key question is how the new PIB will be used in President Buhari's toolbox of economic management now and into the new emerging energy world. Joining me for this curtain-raising conversation is Joe Nwakwue, an oil and gas consultant and partner at Zera Advisory and Consulting. A good evening to you, sir, and welcome to the show. And congratulations to you and others who have worked tirelessly to ensure that this bill has been passed. So, give me your first word on the passage of this bill by the Senate.
Well, from what we know today, the Senate and the House had passed versions of the bill. So, it's not done yet. They will still have to go through harmonization. So, the House version and the Senate version has to be harmonized by a joint committee, and before it is represented to both houses and then subsequently sent to the president for assent. So yes, we're not quite there, but it's an important step that has been taken.
Yes, a very important step. Do you see this harmonization being done very quickly and being passed for Mr. President to put his signature on?
Well, I hope so. Everybody is anxious to see this done. And I, from what we can see, from the way and manner the National Assembly has gone about this, you can see some determination on their side to close this chapter. It's been 20 years on, and I think everybody recognizes the need to do this and do it as quickly as possible. We're already late, so getting it done is probably the only thing we can do today.
How important is this milestone in the oil and gas legislation for Nigeria at this very critical point in the country's economic circumstances?
I would say it's probably the most important piece of legislation that will be passed in the last decade, if you think about it. Remember that this sector contributes 60-70% of our national federal revenue, and this sector as well has been in some kind of decline because investments have not been coming in. The moment Nigeria signaled that we will be changing our fiscal laws, the investors basically adopted a wait and see position. So for as long as this takes, not a whole lot will be happening in the sector. So, and we've started to see the effect of lack of investment in the sector, declining capacity to produce and all that. So it's important that we close this so that the industry can get back on its feet. So it is very, very important, and it's critical to growth, economic growth for Nigeria, because 60-70% of our revenue comes from this sector. And I dare say that going forward, this is still the sector that has the capacity to lift Nigeria up from this, our current situation.
Okay, but do you think the content of what is passed and what will be harmonized will be favorable to the executive branch and Mr. President will sign off on it? Remember, there was a version which was sent to him, which he refused to assent and send it back to the parliament.
Well, I hope he will. This is an executive bill. Okay, so I need to make some clarification. I'm sure you're referring to the PIGB, which was just the governance side of the bill. Yes. That was not signed by Mr. President 3-4 years ago. Remember that the approach that was adopted at the time was to have 4 bills, not one. So one of them was not signed, and this was a member's bill. It wasn't an executive bill. So my expectation is that in this very instance, that's the PIB we're looking at today, this is an executive bill by the executive, and yes, the National Assembly would have modified it somewhat, but I expect that the president will have no problem, being that they, ab initio, proposed this, at least the fundamental basis of the bill came from the executive. So my expectation is that yes, he will go ahead to assent to it ultimately.
You spent some time working on this as a consultant and an oil and gas consultant and someone who has experience in this particular field. Is there any significant change in terms of what we're looking at today from where we started the journey of the PIB 20 years ago?
Sure. I mean, a lot has changed, both from the environment. The industry has radically changed. The industry we have today is not the industry we had 20 years ago when this was started. If you remember, today we're looking at energy transition. We're looking at a demand destruction ultimately for crude. We're looking at the need to basically diversify the sector itself, not just the economy, diversify the sector for growth. So there's a lot that has changed, and the good news is that most of those have been incorporated. When we started this, the cost of production was nowhere near where it is today. So you're looking at totally different set of variables in designing this. But the good news, as I said, is that a whole lot of that has been built in. And I'm sure most of the provisions are forward-looking. They are looking at what should we have in 30 years, 50 years from now. If you think about Nigeria, we're looking at 37 billion barrels of reserve. At current production rate, that's going to take you 50 years to deplete at current rate if you kept everything stable. We don't have 50 years to deplete that. We need to do that faster. And the only way you can do that is to invest. But we don't have the money to invest. So what do? You need investors. So we need a competitive fiscal arrangement that will attract the investor to come in and put money down.
Joe, as you said, the world of oil, gas, and energy has changed since Nigeria's PIB was first mooted 20 years ago. So the question is, how will this help the communities and everyone? Let's come back after the break. Okay, so let's get the PIB conversation going with Joe Nwakwue, partner at Zera Advisory and Consulting, and an oil and gas expert. Joe, thanks very much. You were talking about the whole PIB and what is in it. The part of this conversation is about the global energy future and how this particular document, legislation, will be one of the tools in the toolbox of Mr. President's economic development. So we talk about investments, and we need these investments, both local and foreign. But the question, let's talk about the host communities first. Do you think there's enough provision here to calm the nerves down there and take care of the agitations in the Niger Delta, which is rightly so, and every host community where we're dealing for hydrocarbon in terms of whether they get 3% or they get 5%, or you add 3% to 5% to get 8%. How do you think this significant issue will be resolved within the PIB that set to go live?
Well, I think it's important that they arrive at some number. But most importantly, I think the issue is that for once we are making specific provision for the host communities. And hopefully, that's my expectation, is that that will help calm the nerves and strengthen our freedom to operate in those communities. As you imagine, if you're not at peace with your host, then your operations is going to be hampered negatively. So I think it's very important that we get. It's not really important whether it's 2.5% or 5%. Or I think what's important is that we have a structure that can deliver development and inclusive growth in those host communities. There are a few issues around it, around escalating cost and all of that, but those can be worked. The important thing is that we have an environment that is peaceful enough that can guarantee that our operations do not get disturbed. So I hope, and I understand that the Senate passed 3% and the House of Rep passed 5%. So somewhere in there, they will harmonize the numbers, and we hope to have peace and growth and development in the host communities.
Another part of this document, another leg, is the PIB speaks to local content. In your industry professional viewpoint, do you think this is all it takes for us to get their local content up and running, be part of our industrialization efforts?
Well, the PIB does not quite deal with the local content aspect for the industry. It talks about it, but remember that the law, that we have an effective legislation on Nigerian content. But I think it's important that we recognize that Nigerian content will be on the increase as we implement, if we faithfully implement the PIB, because there are sufficient enough provisions in there that will encourage our local entrepreneurs to get involved. So yes, it doesn't specify directly any local content requirements or regulatory standards, because there's already a legislation that does that. But it creates a framework that will encourage local participation across the value chain, and I think that's very important in having that discussion.
What about the issue around the governance issue and all of that? Is there, when we have this bill passed, will it be a document that is just on the table, or will it be a living document? That's my point, because is it something that we pass today and it just sit there as a document, or do you think there will be developments within the oil and gas industry that will require us tinkering with the letters and the spirit of the PIB?
Well, like all laws, there will always be need for reviews with time. But my sense is that if the version that we saw, the executive version, if what comes out of this process is anything like that, then we will not be reviewing it in a hurry. So I imagine that it will run for some years, then we will, understand what the challenges are, and then, of course, there will be review. The legislative review process will kick in to update it with time as things change, because the environment is not static. It's so dynamic and it's so fast, things change so fast that we will need to tinker with it, I imagine. But it creates a very stable framework within which you can work. I think that's very important. Unlike what we have today, where there's a patchwork of legislation across, we have all sorts of laws, and some of them are not perfectly aligned. So this will close that gap. This will help us to have a framework that is stable enough that you can, and flexible enough to allow you to respond to situations as they develop.
I'm sure you industry folks will be looking at passing the PIB and the level of investments and growth in the industry. Is there a figure you folks are looking at? If you pass the PIB today, are we going to get $1 billion on the table tomorrow from?
No, I haven't seen any such numbers. What I can say, though, is that there are components to this. There are probably 4 components to it. One, we are looking for investment. So a competitive fiscal arrangement will hopefully attract investment, but it takes time for the benefits to materialize. The other one is equally important, is that you are commercializing the national oil company. And I hope, and we had recommended that they should actually go a step further to unbundle it. I don't know what the final version will have, but at a minimum, the idea is that we expect to see some efficiencies from the National Oil Company. That's the second one. The third one, which is probably the most important, is that given the dynamics in the global energy environment, there's need for us to develop the midstream. The Nigerian midstream and downstream has been ignored for so long because we are focused on the upstream. This bill has sought to open up the midstream and the downstream as well for investment, for growth. And that's where most of the economic benefits that could have accrued to the country as an oil-producing nation, that's where we missed it. So if we can energize, incentivize growth in the midstream and the downstream, then Nigeria can conceivably benefit quite a lot from those. And we're talking of gas processing, we're talking of refining, we're talking of all of that, gas to power, gas, petrochemicals. That's the midstream that we have left to lie idle for too long. So this bill creates a midstream infrastructure fund. It does a whole lot, gas pricing and all that. So hopefully it will unlock that sector. And if we do that, then there will be huge economic benefit to the country, whether it's employment, taxation, all that will come in. And the volumes will grow. And I say this, the world we see going forward is not one where you export raw commodities. It's one where you add value to it. And the midstream is the engine, is the vehicle that will allow us to do that.
On a final note, Joe, give me some comfort here as for millions of Nigerians who would see this PIB as a document in the back pocket of the international oil companies or the IOCs, which will leave the local oil participants or players begging to play catch-up.
Sorry, I didn't get that again.
Yeah, I'm asking a very straight question. Is this PIB more in favor of the IOCs than the local oil and gas operators?
No, I think it's agnostic. I don't think it cares whether it cares about investment. And it will hopefully place Nigeria to receive investment irrespective of where it's coming from. Which is what you would do if you're in our situation. You really don't care where the money comes from. You really don't care where the investment comes from. As far as it's here and it's genuine, that's what we need. We need growth in the sector. And I think Nigeria has an open-door policy as far as investment goes. So,
well, I don't know as investment goes, but many Nigerians would rather want a situation in which the IOCs don't remain the dominant player. At least they've been for 60 years.
Well, that's going to be a market-driven thing. It's not something you do through legislation. And we've started to see scaling up by our indigenous players, which is a good thing. But that will continue to happen. Remember, most of the assets that the IOCs hold are either, especially in the JV area, they are all matured. And so they will offload them ultimately to some independents, which hopefully will be Nigerians. Okay. So it's a natural market development thing that will happen. But you cannot legislate that. Okay,
that's fair. That's fair enough. Congratulations to all of you. Joe Nwakwue, oil and gas consultant and partner at Zera Advisory and Consulting. Do have a wonderful evening and see you next time.